I think this is the first panel of the day where people are actually sitting behind their avatars, so you're already doing well. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you guys for staying to watch this. I've got my glasses on from the start so I can see you all, so please do start waving if you have a question from the off. We'll have time for questions, I hope. This panel is important. Why diversity is important. You can see who these guys are. We're going to talk about some of the work that they've done. I'm not going to spend time introducing them. I'm going to jump in straight away with Guy Parker on my left, who's CEO of the ASA. Now, one of the prompts for talking about this is because the ASA in February, you might have seen already, has done some quite interesting work about racial and ethnic stereotypes in advertising. Guy, don't give a long presentation, please. Just give us the elevator top lines of what you found with this research. Just give us a jumping off point.
Okay, it matters. Ethnic and racial stereotyping in advertising matters to people, matters to everyone. Everyone that we researched thinks that in the modern 21st century, UK ads should be diverse and they should represent normal people. And I'll come back to that in a sec, if I may. People struggle to spontaneously recall many problematic ads, which is good. They think UK ads have got better in recent years, which is good. But they still think there's quite a lot of room for improvement. BAME groups in particular, 3 times more likely to feel underrepresented or not represented at all in ads. Over half of BAME respondents felt their group wasn't portrayed accurately. About a quarter of them thought that there was negative stereotyping in the portrayal of their groups in ads. So definitely some issues to focus on. And just coming back to that normal point, normal people point. This is what people want to see in ads. They want authenticity, and they want to see themselves reflected back, and they don't think that's happening enough at the moment. They don't think advertising is as important as other parts of the public square, education, employment, etc., or media, news, entertainment, sport. But with the latter, that's showing people in power. Sport and entertainment are showing, elite people, elite sports people. Advertising, people think that's supposed to be showing me. That's supposed to be showing us. And if it's not doing it very authentically, then that can be received by people as stereotyping. And there were 3 sort of don'ts that came out of the research. Obviously, don't discriminate. That's a kind of no-brainer. Don't reinforce existing stereotypes. Always showing, when you show representations of Asian people, showing them working as pharmacists or doctors, for example, and don't inadvertently create new stereotypes. So there has been change in UK advertising in recent years, but we've got to be careful here that we're not ticking boxes and showing montages, because people spot it, and they spot it straight away, and that could easily become a new stereotype that doesn't help.
Who are the worst offenders? No, I'm sure you're not going to talk about. Steph Matthews at the end from Creative Equals, some of the things that Guy's been talking about, how, in your experience when it comes to the commissioning, training people who are involved in advertising production and planning, how, you don't need to name names unless you want to.
No, I won't.
But can you talk to some of the issues in terms of how the things Guy has been talking about, how some of these things come about?
Yeah, very much so, because I think it's the teams behind the scenes are not representative. They don't reflect the consumers. They don't reflect the audiences that they want to attract. I think that there's often, sometimes there's a lot of kind of hierarchy in who makes the decisions. So it's often an ECD that perhaps makes the final call. And so other different diverse perspectives aren't actually considered when it comes to thinking through the strategy, thinking through the concept, thinking through the casting. So what we always try and recommend is just thinking about getting alternative perspectives in there. So either kind of partnering with the communities that you want to represent, or thinking about talking to internal employee resource groups. So really kind of ensuring that you get those diverse perspectives in so that it's authentic and it's genuine, and so you don't get that kind of stereotyping or tokenistic kind of outcome in your advertising.
That's quite interesting because you've talked about that, I guess, from the agency side.
Correct.
And to your right, Mitch Oliver from Mars, you've probably helped create behind one of the most memorable ads of the last few years, the Maltesers' new boyfriend ad, if anyone's seen that. So for the marketer side, how do you guard against some of the things that Steph's just been talking about in terms of holding the people that make ads to account?
Yeah, I mean, we did. To be honest with you, when we made that ad, which is 7 years ago, I'm still dining out on it.
Enjoy it.
Exactly. But isn't it interesting how noticeable it is that an ad featuring women living with disability still gets mentioned because it's not the norm? We did many of the things that you're recommending. And probably the single biggest thing I think we did when we made that ad was we actually had one of the team was a woman living with a disability herself, and she advised us to talk to Scope. So we brought Scope in at every single stage of the production process. Yep. And we made mistakes, right? When we casted for the ad, we had no disabled toilets available. Ooh. I mean, how embarrassing is that when you're casting for an ad like that? I had no idea that when you're casting for an ad, that you have to go to a specialist casting agency if you want someone who's got a disability, not your mainstream agency, which we're trying to change, I know, as an industry at the moment. But Scope helped us, so we showed them every edit. We got their feedback at it. We never said we would change everything that they wanted us to, but frankly, we did because they understood better. And then the brilliant thing is when actually internally, which is where a lot of the fear of doing this stuff and getting it wrong, and what if we end up, with a Kylie Jenner and on the front pages of the papers, when we could say to our leadership team, we've been working with Scope, the leading experts in disability in the UK, they were like, oh, okay, it must be all right then. So, and Scope put out a statement, had a joint statement saying we'd been working on it together. So that's the single biggest thing we did, is recognise your own biases and limitations and bring someone in or a group in who can broaden and bring their sort of expertise and wisdom to the table.
I think we're still talking about that campaign, which is still one of my favourites, is because you don't get to that sort of brave culture-defining work with one lived experience in the room, right? The fact that you have all these many voices meant that you had this amazing, authentic portrayal that I'd never seen before on TV. It's why we're still talking about it. We don't see women with disabilities talk about relationships or sex. And actually, it was really, we went against the stereotypes. It went against every trope we see on screen when it comes to representation of people with disabilities. It wasn't objectification. It wasn't portraying people with disabilities as victims. It kind of flipped the script, which is why I think it was so powerful and why we're still talking about it 7 years later.
Not the easiest ad to get approved in the business.
I was going to ask, how did you get it approved? It was one of the most complained about ads of the year for us.
Wow.
Yeah, we didn't ban it, but I remember when I first saw it thinking, wow.
And complained about why? I'm interested to know why, because it makes people uncomfortable.
Content.
Oh, okay, so not to do with disability, but the content, right.
Yeah.
But that's not a legitimate grounds for banning something because it makes people feel uncomfortable, is it?
No, but serious or widespread offences, and it pushed at the boundaries, but it was such a well executed ad, and as you say, it challenged stereotypes. It didn't reinforce them. That it didn't take our board very long to give it the thumbs up.
That's interesting. It's about the sexual content. Was it the sexual content plus the intersect of disability that made people feel uncomfortable?
Yes, I think
if it was just the sexual content.
I remember reading most of the
for some
complaints.
people, for some of the complainants, definitely.
It would have kind of been fine. Sex is fine, but when it's sex and disability, I'm not fine with that.
And a telly ad. Yeah.
I think picking up on what Guy's research or the ASA's research is pointing to is we still have this discord between representation and role. So what we're seeing in lots of body of evidence at the moment is that representation alone doesn't do too much to have a positive social impact or do much for the ad's ability to perform better. Having diverse characters in an ad who are still being portrayed stereotypically actually does more harm. So the shift we need to get to is focusing on progressive and positive roles, and that's where we need to see some of the change. This isn't just about sticking diverse people in an ad, it's about doing it with authenticity. It's doing it in an unstereotypical way, which is why, we're talking about stereotypes today. They have a really important role to play in creating better ads, but also shaping society.
And the next series of ads we made on Maltesers, the agency presented, I remember it really clearly. There were 2 ads, and one was set in a car, and the man was driving, and the woman was the passenger. And the other one was about a boss and 2 workers. We didn't make these ads. A boss and 2 workers, and the man was the boss, and the women were the workers. And I remember sitting in that room going, have we learned, why can't the woman be driving? Why can't the woman be the boss? And it wasn't through any deliberate, it was just not challenging the stereotype, exactly to what you're saying, which is where that partnership with the Unstereotype Alliance has been so powerful for us. Just asking the question, why does this have to be a heterosexual couple?
Yep.
Could it be a different kind of couple? Why does it have to be the man who kicks the football? Could it be someone else who does? Why does this person have to be able-bodied? Could they be something else? And the answer might be there's a good reason, but there might not be. And if there isn't, for me, we're in the business of creativity, and creativity being seen through the same lens is boring. We've seen it so many times. Bring us some insight through some different perspectives in the world. Anyway, I'm banging on, so I'll shut up.
Yes, and please wave wildly if you have a question for any of our panel, because I've got lots of questions to ask. It's an interesting contrast with a lot of what we've heard today, particularly around ESG, because a lot of the communication from some of our panelists, particularly in the morning, was that actually it's better to kind of get in there and kind of do something rather than do nothing. But to your point, Melda, about the dangers of stereotyping, actually maybe with good intentions a brand can get this wrong in terms of how they depict more diverse characters. It sounds like that wouldn't be the advice in terms of you have to actually take a much more considered approach. So what do you do for a lot of people in the audience who might be hearing that and think, this is difficult, this is really difficult to get into?
I mean, the first thing to say is that I don't think it's a choice anymore. I think, if you're in the business of creating content, placing content, then this is business as usual. It's not an add-on anymore. Global Monitor there's data that says 65% of consumers want to buy from brands that actively promote diversity and inclusion in their business and society. So I don't think this is a choice. It's something to get on board with and fast. And I think there are steps that brands and agencies can take to make sure they are getting it right. It starts, as Steph is saying, with thinking about your teams and your recruitment and your talent pipeline. And that's really crucial. And I think there are ways that you can build this diversity and inclusion thinking and unstereotypical thinking at every point in the marketing journey. So it's about looking at every aspect of that value chain and creating the right interventions.
And to build on that, it's about not jumping in, but consumers are going to look at the internal, they're going to look at the talent, they're going to look at the diversity and representation of how the LGBT community are being treated in that workplace before you go out and kind of have an advert that kind of portrays you as this LGBT positive employer. So you have to start internally first before I think you can start kind of promoting externally about your inclusive credentials. Because consumers they'll lift up the lid and find it.
Although
you do quite well.
You are right, and that is definitely the right way to do it.
Yeah.
To go back to the infamous disability ads, actually, those going out and being so successful, all of a sudden we were like, oh, how good are we at our disability policies and practices? Should we check?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, let's just do an audit.
Yeah.
And then we ended up sitting on the Business Disability Council with government on Disability Confident, that's what it's called. And so actually the right way is to get your stuff done inside. But I think this is where the power of marketing and our jobs is quite, sometimes how you can create change in the system is by getting out there and going public and going, okay, let's talk about this. And then internally they go, oh God, we better sort it out.
Yes, because marketing are often ahead
Not
of the curve. They're often at the forefront, and then the rest of the business has to catch up because you have to be knowing the consumer.
But also,
slightly higher risk strategy.
If we waited for any business to be perfect before they put their head up, we'd never do anything, would we?
No.
So there are, I agree with what Steph's saying, there are careful steps, particularly when you're representing or portraying marginalised communities, you've got to get that right.
Yeah, because wasn't there the Starbucks ad which had the trans character, which creatively, was incredible. I thought it was brilliant, but it actually had a huge backlash in terms of how the trans employees were treated at Starbucks. So that, you know, whilst it was great, it probably achieved incredible sales, did a lot for changing perceptions. The experience of the trans employees at Starbucks was terrible.
Yeah.
I think you just have to accept there's tension in these areas, and you have to.
I'm not into tension.
You have to manage that tension.
On change, action.
You want to be more progressive in your advertising, but that means that you may have to play a bit of catch up with the way your organisation works and treats people. I think there's a bit of tension between challenging stereotypes, definitely not reinforcing negative stereotypes, hopefully not creating new negative stereotypes, and the all-importance of authenticity and reflecting back normality to people. How do you do that? It's quite easy to get that wrong.
And defining normality, because everyone's normal is different. It's kind of.
It's got, and you end up coming, as quite often with ads, you end up coming back to the all-importance of it being good. Just make sure it's good. If it's good, it's more likely to work, and you're more likely to succeed in managing that creative tension. But, you know, UK advertising is incredibly creative, so it's a kind of good brief to respond to.
I think it's worth mentioning why we're drumming on about stereotypes so much, if I may. I mean, UN women, sorry to state the obvious perhaps, but harmful stereotypes and social norms are one of the biggest barriers to equality globally in every country, which is why we focus so much on dismantling them. They're incredibly ingrained and have endured for centuries since the written word. So unpacking them and dismantling them is a big job to do. It's not an easy job to do. But they are one of the biggest barriers to equality worldwide, which is why we're actively trying to challenge social norms, and the role of media in that is huge. What we believe about ourselves is as big a factor to the lives we live as laws and policies. So challenging ingrained social norms is a crucial part of the work we do towards equality at UN Women.
And I think from my point of view, I don't think anyone should understate what a big undertaking it is, actually. Ian Whittaker in one of the morning panels made the point that for a lot of brands, the risk is that you actually stray into the area of politics. So he referenced the recent example of Disney and the Florida Don't Say Gay, the so-called Don't Say Gay bill. And kind of what Ian said is that they almost had mixed messaging over that, which was the worst of both worlds. Mitch, I mean, I know Maltesers was several years ago, but in the work that you've done since, and I think Friday this week is actually the new awarding of the Channel 4 diversity ad, so almost exactly 7 years. But what advice would you have for brands kind of straying into this area, particularly being mindful of that risk factor?
Okay, so I think that brands should be a force for good in the world, right? Dog food, chocolate bars. We're not trying to solve the world's problems, but you know we can make a difference. I think there is a massive difference between party politics. Mars employs 150,000 people around the world. They will support every party. And we have 60,000 people in the US. They will be as diverse as the US is in terms of who they support, and we have to represent all of the people that work for us, and human rights, okay? And the human rights for all of the people who work for us and all of the people that we represent. And for me, that is the difference. And I feel, quite emotional about it, if I'm honest with you. So our advertising absolutely should play into human rights. If that's gender representation, then just by having the woman driving the car in your ad, you can shift the perception. There are countries in the world where that's only just been made possible in the last 5 years, that women can drive, okay? And we made one of the first ads on Galaxy in the UAE showing a woman driving a car. So it doesn't have to be making big political statements. Not everyone is Ben & Jerry's. Not every brand is Ben & Jerry's. But if you believe in the human rights of the people that work for your organisation, whatever their sexuality, whatever their gender identity, whatever their beliefs, then you should show that up in your advertising, because you also believe in that about the consumers who frankly pay my salary. So I think I really struggle when we make human rights synonymous with politics, because I think there are party politics, and that's absolutely right. We are not going to say, Maltesers is red. Bad analogy. It's not. That's no. There's nothing about that. It just happens.
Also yellow.
It just happens to be red, or whatever. But what we will say is, Maltesers really cares about women. Most of the people who buy Maltesers are women. We care about women. We want to bust stereotypes of women. We want to talk about postnatal depression, which is one of the campaigns we've run recently on Maltesers. So, Skittles, we donate the rainbow for Pride, and underneath that we also donate a significant amount of money to LGBT organisations in the US and in the UK. And some of you will know my other hat on, I'm Vice Chair of Stonewall, so I have personal passion in this space as well. So yeah, sorry, I'll start ranting, but let's not stop progress by this fear of being seen as political. Human rights are not politics. They're human rights.
And not going there is sometimes a political decision with a small p.
Yeah.
Well, when you're dealing with kind of culture war issues, broadly put, and speaking parochially as an ad regulator, running an organisation where we're trying to reflect society. How do you reflect society when it has such binary perspectives on some of these issues? You can't duck it. If you decide not to get involved, you are making a statement, whether you mean to or not. So you have to be thoughtful about it with things like gender stereotyping and racial and ethnic stereotyping. You have to look at the harms, and that's how we underpin the work we do. What potential harms are there in this for individuals in terms of the limiting effect on how they see themselves and how other people see them, but also on society, looking at gender stereotyping and the shortage of engineers and data scientists we got in the UK, and guess what? Women often don't see engineering and data science as being a job for them. The shortage of men in primary education and the lack of male role models in primary education. Guess what? Boys and men are kind of taught by our society not to see primary education as a career for them. These things matter at the individual level, they matter at the societal level, so they are really important.
I think, I sit here from UN Women, so the social value of all of this is why I'm here. But let's not forget the business case as well. We always talk about Unstereotype not just being about a bunch of do-nots. It should be seen as a creative unlock. It should be seen, if the role of advertising is to get people to relate to your brand's message and see themselves, that's going to create more effective advertising if we portray people in an unstereotypical way. We have some data that shows that the more progressive and positive the female and male portrayals are in an ad, the better they perform. So things like 36% better brand power, 25% higher purchase intent. So there is a return on investment for all of this as well for the business and brands.
Which I think is about knowing your audience. So if, as marketeers, our primary job is to know our consumer. And most of the culture wars, which is what we're tabbling around in this conversation, is played out, frankly, on Twitter and in the media. When you, like your research has shown, when you go and talk to people, most of us are quite decent, inclusive, welcoming human beings. So I think, bringing the voice of the consumer into your organisation, not this distorted voice that happens through media and some platforms, is part of our jobs as marketeers. Because actually we see it in the results that you've just shared, we see it in the research that you've just said. I've done research equally in my organisation that most people say, of course, they kind of go, well, of course you should be doing this. Why are you asking, kind of thing? This is my world. So
we've just got a minute left. If anyone does have a burning questions, please do light a fire or something just to get my attention. Yes.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Brilliant. Hi. I think I'm okay.
Yes.
Hi. Nice to meet you all. Thank you so much for this discussion. It's amazing. I kind of have a question around, like you just said, we know that it is the right thing to do. We know that, this is something that we need to do, we ought to be doing. However, I still find that there's this general fear of, like, for example, even when we're saying I'm targeting black people, saying the word black within that conversation is quite arduous. And so I'm kind of curious, in your minds, how can one work within our organizations to get around that language and be able to speak to these strategies when we're targeting audience with advertising?
Who wants to take that? Volunteers?
Gosh, yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, as you were saying, I was thinking about, there's a lot there around educating around inclusive language. There's a lot there around how you make your briefs more inclusive. So thinking about how you add those kind of questions into your briefing template. So when you are thinking about the target audience, that thinking about different types of consumers, their race, their ethnicity becomes more normalized. So rather than it just kind of being an add-on, something that happens, it's something that everyone does as normal when they're thinking through that briefing template. It's making that standardized rather than it just being a kind of something that you've suggested. It needs to be something that everyone gets on board with.
I hear your challenge. I think it's a common one, unfortunately. I think certainly where I've seen companies make strides or have success in this area is when they build a strong business case for change. So if you can match your ambitions to target more black audiences, as your example was, with the business case for that change, the potential ROI, the potential lost dollars, pounds in not targeting the black community, you can get more senior buy-in often when you build the business case around it, not just the moral case, is something that I've seen work quite effectively.
But on the language point, a very, very small practical example, and I think each of us can do this in our lives, and it's something I've learned the hard way to do, is I just ask now. So in an environment like this, I'd say, I had a conversation, so in the US we use the term African American, I'm in a global role. In the UK it's BAME, or is it people of colour? I just tend to ask, in the environment I'm in, what language should I be using? It's the same with sexuality or whatever it is, where you're not sure, or pronouns, asking about pronouns. So I find by asking the question, you're saying, I don't know what the right answer is. I don't have any particular agenda by the language that I use. I'm just not sure. I'm just being a bit vulnerable here, and I don't know quite what the right language is, because it can. I remember. You may have noticed I talk about women living with disability. That's because I did say previously disabled women, and Scope told me not to and said we prefer saying women living with disability because they don't define. So I now use that language, and I would never have known if they hadn't called me. So I think just being really vulnerable about that and asking can be very powerful.
Thank you for the question. I'm so sorry we don't have any time for any more. We're already over time. Fascinating.
We'll be mingling outside though.
Yes, and I wanted to end by asking very quickly, Guy. So fascinating research, giving us lots to talk about today. So what's next? What are you looking at?
We're asking CAP and BCAP, which are the people that write the codes, to explore guidance in this area. So I think that's the kind of big news on the next steps front. But we're running events and more advice and training and all of that stuff as well. But that's the thing to look out for.
Okay, look out for that, everyone. Please give a big hand for an excellent panel. Thank you very much.